She ran barefoot through shattered glass and champagne, her husband's rage echoing behind her like thunder. Elena Cross had one chance: disappear into the chaos of the restaurant or die trying. But when she crawled beneath a table draped in white linen, she didn't find safety. She found silence, the kind that comes when powerful men stop breathing. Above her sat Marco Valenti, a name whispered in fear across the city, a man who controlled empires with a glance. He saw her trembling hands, her bleeding feet, her desperate eyes, and he did not look away. If you want to see how Elena's story unfolds, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Booked. The restaurant was called Celestine, and it was the kind of place where silence costs more than noise. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls above tables dressed in cream and gold. The air smelled of seared wagyu and desperation masked by cologne. Waiters moved like shadows, trained to see nothing, hear less. It was a place where deals were made in whispers and enemies smiled over wine. Elena Cross sat across from her husband, David, and tried to remember how to breathe. Her hands were folded in her lap, hidden beneath the table, fingers knotted so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She wore a dress he'd chosen, emerald silk that clung to her like a second skin, elegant and suffocating. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon. Her makeup was perfect. She looked like a woman who had everything. She felt like a woman with nothing left to lose. David was talking. He was always talking. His voice was smooth, controlled, the kind of voice that charmed investors and intimidated assistants. Tonight, it had an edge, a sharpness that made her stomach twist. "You embarrassed me today," he said quietly, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "At the gallery, in front of the Hendersons." Elena's throat tightened. "I didn't mean to. You contradicted me. I was just... You made me look weak." His eyes lifted, and for a moment she saw it, the thing that lived beneath his charm, the thing that only she ever saw, cold, calculating, cruel. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I know you are." He reached across the table, his hand closing over hers. To anyone watching, it looked tender. But his grip was too tight, his thumb pressing into the bruise he'd left 2 nights ago when she'd dropped a glass during one of his dinner parties. "We'll talk about it at home," he said softly. And she knew what that meant. The waiter appeared, refilling their wine. Elena watched the deep red liquid swirl into her glass and thought about drowning, about disappearing, about all the ways a person could vanish without ever leaving the room. David released her hand and returned to his meal, his control restored. He talked about the merger, about the Hendersons, about expansion plans and quarterly projections. She nodded when expected, smiled when required, and felt herself shrinking with every passing second. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, and stood abruptly. "I need to take this. Don't move." He walked toward the lobby, his posture rigid, his voice already rising as he answered the call. Elena sat alone at the table, her pulse hammering in her ears. She looked around the restaurant. Couples leaned close over candlelight. A group of businessmen laughed too loudly near the bar. A woman in diamonds touched her companion's wrist and whispered something that made him grin. No one looked at her. No one ever did. She was a ghost in emerald silk, a decoration on David Cross's arm, a woman whose name appeared on charity galas and society pages, but whose voice had been erased years ago. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her wine. That's when she heard David's voice, louder now, cutting through the ambient hum of the restaurant. "I don't care what he said. You tell him if he backs out now, he's done. Finished. I will bury him." The warmth drained from Elena's face. She knew that tone, the one that came before the storm, before his hand found her wrist, her throat, her hair, before the apologies that never meant anything, before the promises that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow was never different. David returned to the table, his face flushed, his jaw tight. He didn't sit. He stood over her, radiating fury barely contained beneath his tailored suit. "We're leaving," he said. "David, what? Now." His hand closed around her upper arm, yanking her to her feet. Pain shot through her shoulder. She gasped, stumbling in her heels. David, please! Shut up. He started dragging her toward the exit, his grip bruising, his stride too fast for her to match. She tried to keep up, tried to stay quiet, tried not to make a scene. That was the rule. Never make a scene. But then he stopped. A waiter had stepped into their path, apologetic, oblivious. Sir, if you'd like your check. David shoved him aside. The young man stumbled, his tray clattering to the floor, glasses shattering in an explosion of sound that turned every head in the restaurant. David! Elena's voice cracked, shock overriding fear. He whirled on her and she saw it. The moment his control snapped, his hand came up. She flinched, instinct overriding everything else, her arms rising to protect her face. He caught himself, barely. His fist hovered in the air between them, trembling with rage. Around them, the restaurant had gone silent. People were staring now. Phones were out. Whispers rippled through the room like wildfire. David's face contorted, humiliation, fury. He grabbed her again, harder this time, his fingers digging into her arm like claws. You stupid! Something inside Elena broke. She wrenched free. For the first time in 3 years, she pulled away from him with every ounce of strength she had, and his shock gave her just enough time. She ran. Elena! His voice exploded behind her, but she didn't stop. She kicked off her heels mid-stride, her bare feet slapping against marble as she bolted toward the back of the restaurant. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't let him catch her. Not tonight. Not again. The restaurant blurred around her, startled faces, half-risen guests, a waiter frozen with a bottle of wine. She heard David shouting, heard his footsteps pounding after her, heard the chaos erupting in her wake. She burst through a door marked private and found herself in a dimly lit corridor. Wine storage, event rooms, staff exits, and a dining room at the end of the hall, its doors slightly ajar. She ran for it. Behind her, David's voice was getting closer. Elena, stop! You're making this worse! She shoved through the doors and stumbled into a private dining room, and froze. The room was smaller than the main restaurant, intimate and shadowed. A single long table dominated the space, set with dark wood and low candlelight, and around it sat 6 men. They had stopped mid-conversation. Every pair of eyes turned toward her. Elena's breath caught in her throat. These were not businessmen, not society elites sipping wine and discussing portfolios. These were predators. She could feel it in the way they watched her, still, assessing, dangerous. In the expensive suits that fit too well, the watches that cost more than cars, the scars half hidden by designer cologne and cold eyes. And at the head of the table sat a man who made the air itself seem heavier. Marco Valenti. She didn't know his name, not yet. But she knew what he was. She could see it in the way the others deferred to him without moving, the way his silence commanded more respect than any words could. He was in his late 30s, dark-haired and sharp-featured, his suit tailored to perfection. His eyes were the color of smoke and stone, and they held hers with an intensity that made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Behind her, David's footsteps echoed down the corridor. Panic surged through her. She looked around wildly. No other exit, no windows, nowhere to go. Her eyes dropped to the table. It was long, covered in a heavy white cloth that reached nearly to the floor. She didn't think. She dropped to her knees and crawled beneath it. The tablecloth fell around her like a curtain, plunging her into shadow. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Her breathing was too loud, ragged, and desperate. She pressed her hands over her mouth, trying to muffle the sound. Above her, she heard a chair shift. Then Marco's voice, low and calm. Gentlemen? The door slammed open. Where is she? David's voice was wild now, stripped of its usual polish. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, her whole body trembling. Excuse me? Marco's tone didn't change. Still calm, still quiet. But something in it made the room temperature drop. My wife. She ran in here. Where is she? Silence. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the cold marble beneath her bare feet, the rough wood of the table leg against her shoulder, could smell wine and fear and expensive leather. I don't know what you're talking about, Marco said, but you're interrupting a private meeting. I saw her come in here. You saw wrong. David's breath hitched. Elena could picture him, scanning the room, his mind racing, his control slipping further with every second. She's here. I know she is. You need to leave. Marco's voice was softer now, almost gentle, and somehow that made it more terrifying. Do you know who I am? David Cross. Cross Capital. You'll leave. Not a threat, a fact. Or my colleagues will help you leave. Your choice. The room went still. Elena held her breath. She heard David's ragged breathing, heard his shoes scuff against the floor, heard the moment his survival instinct overpowered his rage. This isn't over, he said finally, his voice shaking. Yes, Marco said quietly. It is. Footsteps retreated. The door closed. Silence settled over the room like snow. Elena stayed frozen beneath the table, her mind blank with shock and adrenaline. She didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. Above her, she heard the scrape of a chair, then Marco's voice, calm and commanding. Clear the room. Boss, now. Footsteps moved toward the exit. Low murmurs, the sound of the door opening and closing. Then nothing. Elena waited, her muscles locked, her thoughts spiraling. He was going to expose her, turn her over to David. Or worse. You can come out. His voice was quiet, almost conversational. She didn't move. I'm not going to hurt you. Still, she stayed frozen. A long pause. Then she heard him move, his footsteps slow and deliberate as he walked around the table. He stopped a few feet away and crouched down, lifting the tablecloth just enough to see her. Their eyes met. Elena's breath caught. Up close, his face was harder than she'd thought. A scar cut through his left eyebrow. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass. But his eyes, those smoke-gray eyes, held something she didn't expect. Not cruelty, not pity. Curiosity. Are you hurt? He asked. She couldn't speak, could only stare at him, her mind blank with fear and exhaustion. He glanced down at her feet, at the cuts from the broken glass, the smears of blood on the marble. His jaw tightened. Come out, he said again, his voice gentler this time. Slowly. She didn't trust him, but she didn't have a choice. Slowly, shakily, she crawled out from beneath the table. Her legs barely held her as she stood, swaying on her feet. The room tilted. Marco caught her elbow, steadying her. His touch was firm, but not forceful, controlled. Sit, he said, guiding her toward a chair. She sank into it, her whole body trembling. He stepped back, giving her space, and studied her for a long moment. His gaze swept over her torn dress, her bruised arm, her bleeding feet. He said nothing, but his expression darkened. Finally, he turned and walked to a side table, pouring a glass of water from a crystal decanter. He brought it to her. Drink. She took it with shaking hands and drank, the cool water soothing her raw throat. He waited until she'd finished, then pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, his movements unhurried. What's your name? He asked. Elena. Her voice was barely a whisper. Elena. He repeated it as if testing the weight of it. I'm Marco. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Who was that man? My husband. Something flickered in his eyes. Not surprise. Something colder. He does this often? She looked down at her hands, at the bruises blooming purple beneath the skin. I should go, she whispered. Where? The question stopped her cold. Where would she go? Back to David? To the house that felt like a prison? To the life where she was nothing more than an accessory? I don't know, she admitted. Marco leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her face. You can't go back to him tonight, he said. It wasn't a question. I don't have anywhere else. You do now. She looked up sharply, her eyes wide. He stood, pulling his phone from his pocket. I'm going to have someone take you somewhere safe. You'll stay there tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest. Why? The word came out before she could stop it. He paused, studying her. Because you didn't scream when you saw me, he said finally. You ran from him, not me. He made a call, his voice low and clipped. Instructions given in words she didn't understand. When he ended the call, he looked at her again. Someone will be here in 5 minutes. They'll take you to one of my properties. You'll be safe there." "I can't. You already did." His tone left no room for argument. Elena's mind raced. She didn't know this man, didn't know what he wanted from her, but when she looked into his eyes, she didn't see the same thing she saw in David's. She saw control, yes, power, absolutely, but not cruelty. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Marco opened it, revealing a woman in her 40s, dressed in black, her expression neutral. "This is Lucia," Marco said. "She'll take care of you." Lucia stepped forward, her eyes softening slightly as she saw Elena's condition. "Come with me, Cara," she said gently. Elena stood on unsteady legs. She looked at Marco one last time. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once. "Don't thank me yet." Lucia led Elena through the back corridors of the restaurant, avoiding the main floor entirely. They exited through a service door into a narrow alley where a black car waited, its engine running. Lucia opened the door for her. "Get in." Elena hesitated for only a moment before sliding into the back seat. The leather was soft, the interior spotless. Lucia sat beside her, and the driver pulled away without a word. They drove in silence through the city, the lights blurring past Elena's window. She watched the familiar streets give way to unfamiliar ones, the buildings growing taller, the neighborhood shifting from commercial to residential to something in between. Finally, the car turned into a gated driveway. High walls, security cameras. The gate slid open smoothly, and they continued up a long drive lined with trees. The house? No, the estate, rose before them like something out of a dream. Modern architecture blended with classic elegance. Warm lights glowed from tall windows. Gardens stretched into darkness. The car stopped at the entrance. Lucia helped Elena out and guided her inside. The interior was stunning. High ceilings, marble floors, art that probably cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe. But it wasn't cold. Somehow, despite its grandeur, it felt lived in. "This way," Lucia said. She led Elena up a curved staircase and down a quiet hallway, stopping at a door near the end. "This will be your room," Lucia said, opening the door. Elena stepped inside and stopped. The room was beautiful. A large bed with soft white linens, a sitting area by tall windows overlooking the gardens, an ensuite bathroom visible through an open door. "There are clothes in the closet," Lucia said. "Clean towels in the bathroom. If you need anything, press the button by the bed. Someone will come." Elena turned to her, overwhelmed. "I don't understand. Why is he doing this?" Lucia's expression softened. "Mr. Valenti has his reasons," she said quietly. "But tonight, all you need to do is rest. You're safe here." She left, closing the door softly behind her. Elena stood alone in the middle of the room, her mind spinning. Safe. When was the last time she'd felt safe? She walked to the window and looked out at the gardens, at the city lights in the distance. Somewhere out there, David was looking for her, calling her phone, spinning a story to explain her absence. But here, in this strange, beautiful place, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. She turned away from the window and walked into the bathroom. The shower was rainfall style, luxurious and inviting. She turned it on, letting the water heat, and slowly peeled off her torn dress. She stepped under the spray and let the water wash over her, washing away blood, tears, fear. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elena Cross allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow could be different. The next morning, sunlight woke her. Elena blinked awake slowly, disoriented. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory flooded back. The restaurant, the table, Marco's gray eyes, the car ride, this room. She sat up, her body aching from tension and adrenaline. The clock on the nightstand read 9:47. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Come in," she said hesitantly. Lucia entered, carrying a tray. "Good morning. I brought breakfast." She set the tray on the small table by the window. Coffee, fresh fruit, pastries, orange juice. "Thank you," Elena said. Lucia nodded. "Mr. Valenti would like to speak with you when you're ready. No rush." Elena's stomach tightened. "Okay." Lucia left, and Elena forced herself to eat, though her appetite was non-existent. The coffee helped. The normalcy of it helped. When she finished, she found clothes in the closet as promised, simple, elegant, in her size. She didn't question how they knew. She just dressed, braided her hair, and tried to steady her breathing. Finally, she left the room. The estate was quiet in the daylight. She followed the hallway back to the stairs and descended slowly, unsure where to go. "Miss Cross?" She turned. A young man in a dark suit stood in a doorway. "Mr. Valenti is in his study. This way." She followed him through the house, her heart hammering. The study was lined with books, dark wood, and leather. Marco sat behind a large desk, reviewing papers. He looked up as she entered. "Elena, sit." She sat in the chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap. He set aside his papers and studied her. "How are you feeling?" "Confused." A faint smile touched his mouth. "Fair. Why are you helping me?" "Because you needed help." "That's not an answer." His smile deepened slightly. "No, it's not." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I'm going to be honest with you, Elena. Your husband is a problem. He's already filed a missing persons report. He's spinning a story that you're unstable, that you had a breakdown at dinner and ran off." Elena's stomach dropped. "Of course he is." "He's also connected, not to my world, but to people who matter. Lawyers, politicians, money." "I know. So going back to him isn't an option, not safely. I wasn't planning to." "Good." Marco paused. "But you can't just disappear either. He'll find you. Men like him always do." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Marco's gaze held hers steady and unflinching. "You stay here, under my protection, until we figure out a permanent solution." "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm offering." Elena stared at him, searching for the catch, the ulterior motive, the hidden price. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. "Nothing," he said. "Yet." That honesty, brutal and clear, somehow steadied her more than any reassurance could have. "This isn't charity, Elena," he continued. "I don't do charity, but I also don't allow men like your husband to operate unchecked. Consider this, an investment." "In what?" His eyes glinted. "In seeing what happens when you stop running." The words hung between them. Elena took a slow breath. "How long?" "As long as it takes." She looked down at her hands, at the bruises already fading to yellow-green. When she looked up again, her voice was stronger. "Okay." Marco nodded once. "Then we start now." The first 3 days passed in a fog of uncertainty and unwanted comfort. Elena stayed in her room mostly, venturing out only when Lucia brought meals or when the silence became too heavy to bear. The estate was vast, filled with corridors that led to rooms she didn't dare explore, windows that overlooked gardens she didn't feel entitled to walk through. She was a guest, yes, but she was also a prisoner of her own hesitation, trapped between gratitude and suspicion. Marco kept his distance. She saw him only in passing, a glimpse of him crossing the foyer with men in dark suits, the sound of his voice from behind closed doors, the expensive scent of his cologne lingering in hallways after he'd already gone. He didn't seek her out, didn't check on her, didn't demand anything. And somehow, that was worse than if he had. On the fourth morning, Elena woke to find Lucia waiting in the sitting area of her room, a steaming cup of coffee already poured. "Mr. Valenti would like you to join him for breakfast," Lucia said. "Downstairs, 30 minutes." It wasn't a request. Elena showered quickly, dressed in one of the simple outfits from the closet, tailored black pants and a cream silk blouse, and braided her hair with trembling fingers. Her reflection looked calmer than she felt. The bruises on her arm had faded to shadows. The cuts on her feet had healed, but the tension in her shoulders remained. Lucia led her through the estate to a sun-drenched dining room that overlooked the gardens. The table was set for two. Marco was already seated, reading something on his tablet, a cup of espresso steaming beside him. He looked up as she entered. "Good morning." "Good morning." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, eat." She sat, and almost immediately staff appeared with plates, Fresh fruit, warm pastries, eggs prepared perfectly, toast with butter that melted on contact. It was more food than she'd eaten in days. Marco set aside his tablet and watched her as she picked up her fork. "You've been avoiding me," he said. "I didn't think you wanted to see me. If I didn't want to see you, you wouldn't be here." Fair point. Elena took a bite of eggs, buying herself time. "I wasn't sure what you expected from me." "Nothing, yet," he echoed his earlier words. "But hiding in your room isn't sustainable." "I wasn't hiding." His look said he didn't believe her. She set down her fork. "What do you want from me, Marco?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those smoke-gray eyes that saw too much. "I want you to stop acting like you're waiting for permission to breathe," he said bluntly. "This isn't your husband's house. You're not walking on eggshells here." "I don't know how to be anywhere else." The words came out before she could stop them, raw and honest. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity. Something sharper. "Then learn," he said. She blinked. "What?" "You heard me. Learn. You're safe here, Elena. But safety isn't the same as freedom. If you want freedom, you have to take it." "I don't know how." "I know." He picked up his espresso, his gaze never leaving hers. "That's why you're going to let me teach you." Her pulse quickened. "Teach me what?" "How to survive, how to fight, how to stop being afraid." Elena stared at him, her mind racing. "Why would you do that?" "Because you already did the hard part," Marco said. "You ran. Most people don't even get that far. They stay, they make excuses, they convince themselves it's not that bad. But you ran. That takes guts. Now we just need to sharpen them." She looked down at her hands, at the faint scars that would never fully fade. "What if I can't?" "You can." His voice was absolute. "You just don't know it yet." He stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Finish breakfast, then meet me in the East Wing. Lucia will show you." He left before she could respond. Elena sat alone in the bright dining room, her heart pounding, her mind spinning with questions she didn't have answers to. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Curiosity. The East Wing turned out to be a private gym that looked like it belonged in a high-end training facility. Weights lined one wall. Punching bags hung from reinforced beams. Mats covered the floor. Floor-to-ceiling mirrors reflected everything. Marco was already there, dressed in black athletic wear that made him look even more dangerous than his suits did. He was wrapping his hands with practiced efficiency. Elena stood in the doorway, suddenly feeling ridiculous in the yoga pants and tank top Lucia had left for her. "Come in," Marco said without looking up. "Close the door." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The click of the latch felt final. Marco finished wrapping his hands and turned to face her. "Have you ever trained before? Martial arts? Boxing? Anything?" "No?" "Good. No bad habits to break." He gestured to the mats. "Come here." She walked over slowly, her bare feet silent on the floor. "First lesson," Marco said. Awareness. Most people lose fights before they even start because they don't see the danger coming. They ignore red flags. They rationalize. They convince themselves it won't happen again. You know what I'm talking about. Elena's jaw tightened. Yes. So we start there, recognizing threats, reading body language, understanding intent before it becomes action. He moved suddenly, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. Elena flinched, stepping back instinctively. Marco stopped. "Why did you do that?" "You moved toward me. And you retreated." "Why?" "Because—" She hesitated. "Because I thought you were going to hit you." She nodded, her cheeks burning. Marco's expression didn't change. "I wasn't, but your body knew to protect itself. That's good. That's instinct. Now we're going to train that instinct to do more than just flinch." He stepped back, giving her space. "Again, I'm going to move toward you. This time, don't retreat. Hold your ground." "I don't think I can try." He moved again, faster this time. Elena's breath hitched, but she forced herself to stay still, every muscle locked tight. Marco stopped inches from her. "Good. That's step 1. Not running. I feel like I'm going to throw up. You'll get used to it. He moved back to a comfortable distance. Now we work on the rest. For the next 2 hours, Marco put her through drills that had nothing to do with punching or kicking. Instead, he taught her to read his movements, to anticipate his intentions, to recognize the subtle shifts in posture that signaled aggression. He moved around her in circles, sometimes slow, sometimes fast. He'd reach for her without warning, and she had to react, block, deflect, sidestep. At first, she failed more than she succeeded, but slowly, painfully, she began to understand the rhythm of it. "Your husband," Marco said as they paused for water. "Did he ever telegraph his attacks?" Elena froze, the bottle halfway to her lips. "Answer me." She swallowed hard. "Yes." His jaw would tighten. His hand would curl into a fist. He'd get very still before he moved. Marco nodded. "Most abusers have patterns. They can't help it. Rage is predictable, even when it's chaotic. If you can recognize the pattern, you can prepare." "Prepare how?" "Leave before it starts. Fight back if you can't. Survive if you can't do either." He set down his water. "But you're past that now. You're here. So now we focus on making sure you never have to go back." They trained until her muscles screamed and sweat soaked through her clothes. Marco was relentless, patient, but unyielding, pushing her past the point where she wanted to quit. Finally, he called a halt. "Enough for today," he said. "You did well." Elena collapsed onto the mat, her chest heaving. "I feel like I got hit by a truck." "You'll feel worse tomorrow." He offered her a hand. She hesitated only a second before taking it. His grip was strong, steady, pulling her to her feet with ease. "Same time tomorrow," he said. "Every day?" "Every day." She nodded, too exhausted to argue. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. But more than that, her mind wouldn't stop replaying the day. Marco's voice, his instructions, the way he'd looked at her, not with pity or condescension, but with expectation. Like he believed she could do this. She got out of bed and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens bathed in moonlight. Somewhere beyond those walls, David was still looking for her, still calling her phone, still convinced she'd come back. But for the first time, Elena didn't feel the pull of obligation, didn't feel the weight of his voice in her head telling her she was nothing without him. She felt something else, anger. Yeshan. The next 3 weeks fell into a brutal routine. Every morning, Elena trained with Marco. He taught her to punch without breaking her thumb, to kick without losing her balance, to use her opponent's momentum against them. He taught her to breathe through pain, to think through fear, to move when every instinct screamed at her to freeze. And slowly, impossibly, she got stronger. Her body changed, muscles defined beneath her skin, her reflexes sharpened. The hesitation that had plagued her for years began to fade, replaced by something harder, something colder. Marco watched her transformation with quiet approval. He pushed her harder when she showed weakness, backed off when she pushed too far. He learned her limits and then taught her to break them. But he never touched her unnecessarily, never crossed lines, never asked for anything beyond her effort. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling session, Elena found herself on her back on the mat, staring at the ceiling, her chest heaving. Marco stood over her, barely winded. "Get up." "I can't." "Yes, you can." "I'm serious. I'm done." He crouched beside her, his expression unreadable. "When your husband came at you, did you get to call a timeout?" Her jaw clenched. "No." "So get up." She wanted to argue, wanted to scream at him that this wasn't fair, that she'd already given everything she had, but instead she rolled onto her side, pushed herself to her knees, and stood. Marco nodded. Again, it wasn't just physical training. In the evenings, Marco would sometimes join her for dinner, not every night, but often enough that she stopped being surprised by his presence. They'd eat in the dining room or on the terrace, and he'd ask her questions about her life before David, about her family, about the choices that had led her to that restaurant, to that table, to him. At first she gave short answers, guarded and careful, but Marco had a way of listening that made her want to keep talking. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just listened with that focused intensity that made her feel like every word mattered. My parents died when I was 22, she told him one night over wine and pasta. Car accident. I was in grad school, studying art history. Suddenly, I had no family, no safety net, nothing. David was there. He was charming, successful. He made me feel safe. And then? And then he made me feel like I owed him for that safety. She took a sip of wine. Little things at first, suggestions about what to wear, who to talk to, then bigger things, where I could go, who I could see. By the time I realized what was happening, I didn't know how to get out. Marco swirled his wine, his gaze distant. Control is a slow poison. It doesn't kill you all at once. It just makes you forget what it felt like to be alive. She looked at him sharply. You sound like you know. Everyone knows, he said quietly. One way or another. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to know what ghosts lived behind those gray eyes. But before she could, he changed the subject. You said you studied art history. Yes. Do you miss it? The question caught her off guard. I don't know. I haven't thought about it in years. Why not? Because David said it was impractical, that I needed to focus on being his wife, supporting his career. Marco's jaw tightened. And you believed him? I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, Elena, even when it doesn't feel like it. She set down her glass. Easy for you to say. No, he said. It's not. The weight in his voice stopped her. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the table, two people carrying scars they didn't talk about. Finally, Marco stood. Think about it. What you'd do if you could do anything. No limitations, no fear, just you and what you want. He left her alone on the terrace, the question hanging in the air like smoke. 4 weeks into her stay, Elena woke to the sound of raised voices downstairs. She slipped out of bed and crept to her door, opening it just enough to hear. Not your problem, Marco. A man's voice, rough and irritated. You're drawing attention. People are asking questions. Let them ask. Marco's voice, calm and cold. Her husband has connections. You know that. You're risking exposure for what? Some scared housewife? Elena's breath caught. Watch your mouth, Dante. Marco's tone dropped dangerously low. She's under my protection. That makes her my business. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. Silence. Then Dante again, quieter now. You're getting soft. No, I'm getting clear. There's a difference. Footsteps. A door slamming. Elena backed away from her door, her heart pounding. Getting soft. Was that what this was? Marco risking his reputation, his standing, for her? She didn't know whether to feel grateful or guilty. That afternoon, she asked him about it. They were in the gym, taking a water break between rounds. Elena wiped sweat from her face and took a breath. I heard you arguing with someone this morning. Marco didn't look surprised. Dante, he has opinions. About me. About everything. Marco took a drink. Don't worry about it. He said you're risking exposure. What does that mean? Marco set down his bottle and turned to face her fully. It means that protecting you makes me visible in ways I'd prefer not to be. Your husband is making noise, filing reports, hiring investigators, and every day you're here, I'm more connected to you in their eyes. Then why keep me here? Because I said I would. That's not a good enough reason. It's the only reason that matters. His eyes held hers. I don't go back on my word, Elena. Not for Dante. Not for anyone. She looked at him, at the hard lines of his face, the scars he carried like medals, the strength that radiated from him like heat. You don't owe me this, she said quietly. I know. Then why? He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Because when you crawled under that table, you didn't beg. You didn't cry. You didn't make excuses. You just survived. And people who survive deserve a chance to do more than that. The honesty in his words hit her harder than any punch. What if I can't? She whispered. What if I'm not strong enough? Marco stepped closer, his presence overwhelming but not threatening. You already are, he said. You just don't see it yet, but you will. Cut. That night, Elena stood in front of the mirror in her room, studying her reflection. She looked different, leaner, harder. Her eyes held something they hadn't before, a glint of steel beneath the softness. She thought about Marco's question. What would she do if she could do anything? For years, she hadn't allowed herself to want anything. Wanting led to disappointment, to punishment, to David's voice in her head telling her she was selfish, ungrateful, weak. But now, in the quiet of this room, in the safety of this house, she let herself think. What did she want? The answer came slowly, but when it did, it was absolute. She wanted to stop being afraid. She wanted to look David in the eye without flinching. She wanted to be the kind of woman who walked into a room and owned it, who didn't apologize for existing, who didn't shrink herself to make others comfortable. She wanted to be free. And for the first time in her life, she believed she could be. The next morning, she met Marco in the gym with new determination. I want to fight him, she said without preamble. Marco looked up from wrapping his hands. Who? David. I want to be ready to face him, not run, not hide, face him. Something flickered in Marco's eyes. Approval, maybe. Or respect. That's a dangerous choice, he said. I know. He won't fight fair. Neither will I. Not anymore. Marco studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. Then we change the training. No more drills, no more basics. We train for real. What does that mean? He smiled, and it was the most dangerous thing she'd ever seen. It means I stop pulling punches. The training intensified to a level Elena hadn't thought possible. Marco brought in specialists, a Krav Maga instructor who taught her to fight dirty, a weapons expert who showed her how to turn everyday objects into tools of defense, a psychologist who helped her understand the mind games abusers play. She learned pressure points and nerve strikes. She learned how to disarm someone with a knife. She learned how to use fear as a weapon instead of letting it use her. And through it all, Marco was there, watching, correcting, pushing. One evening, after a brutal session that left her bleeding from a split lip, she confronted him. Why are you doing this? She demanded, her voice raw. Really? Not the bullshit about keeping your word. Why? Marco handed her a towel. You want the truth? Yes. He looked at her for a long moment, something dark and old moving behind his eyes. Because I know what it's like to be trapped, he said quietly, to feel like you have no way out. And I know what it takes to break free. It's not pretty, it's not easy, but it's worth it. You were trapped? In a different way, but yes. He turned away, his shoulders tight. And when I got out, I swore I'd never let anyone make me feel that powerless again. I see that same fire in you, Elena. You just need permission to let it burn. She stepped closer. I don't need permission. He turned back, surprise flickering across his face. You're right, she said. I'm done asking for permission. From David, from you, from anyone. If I'm going to burn, it'll be because I chose to. For the first time since she'd met him, Marco smiled. A real smile, not the dangerous one or the calculated one, but something genuine. Good, he said. Then let's make sure you burn bright enough that everyone sees you coming. 6 weeks had passed since the night Elena had crawled beneath that table, and the woman staring back at her in the mirror was a stranger. She stood in the gym wearing training gear that had become like a second skin, her muscles defined in ways they'd never been, her stance balanced and ready. The softness that had once made her easy to dismiss had been carved away, replaced by something harder, something that looked back at the world with unflinching eyes. Marco entered the gym and stopped short, his gaze sweeping over her with an appraising look that held no trace of the condescension she'd once endured from David. You're early, he said. I couldn't sleep. Elena rolled her shoulders, feeling the familiar pull of muscle and sinew. I keep thinking about what comes next. And what do you think comes next? She turned to face him fully. I stop hiding. Marco set down the coffee he'd been carrying and walked onto the mats. Elaborate. I've been here 6 weeks, safe, training, getting stronger. But David is still out there, still telling people I'm unstable, still controlling the narrative. And as long as he gets to do that, I'm not really free. I'm just hiding better. Smart people know the difference between hiding and strategizing. I'm done strategizing. Her voice was firm, steady. I want to face him. Marco studied her with those smoke-gray eyes that saw too much. You sure about that? Yes. Because facing him isn't the same as being ready for him. He'll use every weapon he has, lawyers, money, connections. He'll try to destroy you legally, financially, publicly, and he'll do it with a smile on his face. I know. Elena stepped closer. But I also know that I can't move forward while he's still got his hands around my throat, even from a distance. Marco was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right. Then we prepare you properly. No more training like you're learning self-defense. We train like you're going to war. I thought that's what we were already doing. No. His expression hardened. We were building your foundation. Now we build your arsenal. He moved to the center of the mat, gesturing for her to join him. The thing about men like your husband is that they rely on specific tactics. Intimidation, gaslighting, using your fear against you. So we're going to drill scenarios until you can handle every single one without breaking. Elena joined him on the mat. How? By putting you through them, over and over, until the fear becomes background noise. He paused. It won't be pleasant. I'm not looking for pleasant. I'm looking for effective. Something almost like pride flickered across Marco's face. Then let's begin. What followed was unlike anything they'd done before. Marco didn't just teach her to fight physically. He recreated the psychological warfare David had mastered. He'd shift from supportive instructor to cold interrogator without warning, using David's words, David's tone, David's tactics to see if she'd crack. You're being dramatic, Marco said, his voice taking on David's smooth condescension as they sparred. You always overreact. Maybe if you'd just calm down. Elena's fist connected with the pad he held, harder than before. You think you're strong now? Marco continued, circling her. You think you're different? You'll go running back the moment things get hard. You always do. She pivoted, her kick landing solid. I'm not running. You're pathetic. Who's going to believe you? You're nobody without me. Elena's jaw clenched, but her hands stayed steady. She struck again and again, each hit more controlled than the last. Good, Marco said, dropping the act. You're learning to separate his words from reality. Again. They went through it over and over, Marco playing the role of aggressor with an accuracy that made Elena's skin crawl. But each time she responded with less emotion and more precision. The words that once would have shattered her began to lose their power. During a water break, Elena leaned against the wall, her chest heaving. How do you know exactly what to say? Marco took a long drink before answering. Because men like David are predictable. They all use the same playbook. Isolate, undermine, control. I've seen it 1,000 times. In your work? And in life. He set down his bottle. My father was a master at it. Made my mother believe she was nothing without him. By the time I was old enough to understand what was happening, she was too far gone to save. Elena looked at him sharply. He'd never spoken about his family before. What happened to her? She stayed until it killed her. Heart attack at 47. His voice was flat, emotionless. The doctor said it was stress. I knew it was him. I'm sorry. Don't be. Just don't end up like her. That's why we're doing this. The weight of that confession settled between them. Elena straightened, pushing off the wall. Then let's keep going. I'm not done yet. Marco's expression shifted into something almost like a smile. No, you're not. They trained until Elena's muscles screamed and her mind felt scraped raw. But when they finally stopped, she felt something she hadn't in years. Powerful. Not just physically, but mentally. The words that had once controlled her had become nothing more than sounds. That evening, Lucia found Elena in the library, paging through old art history books she'd discovered on the shelves. Mr. Valenti asked me to give you this, Lucia said, handing her a small folder. Elena opened it and found legal documents inside. restraining order paperwork, divorce filings, documentation of abuse with statements from medical professionals who'd examined her injuries when she'd first arrived. He had his lawyers prepare everything, Lucia said quietly. All you have to do is sign, and they'll file it tomorrow. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she looked through the papers. It was all there, laid out in clinical language. A roadmap to freedom. Why now? Elena asked. Because he knows you're ready. Lucia's expression softened. And because he wants you to know you have options. Always. After Lucia left, Elena sat with the papers for a long time. Signing them would mean making this real. No more hiding, no more waiting. It would mean David would know where she was, what she was doing. It would mean war. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 weeks ago, trembling under a table, too afraid to breathe too loudly. Then she thought about the woman she was now, the one who could take a punch and deliver one back, the one who'd learned to turn fear into fuel. She picked up the pen and signed every page. The next morning, Elena found Marco in his study, reviewing what looked like security footage on multiple screens. I signed the papers, she said from the doorway. He looked up, his expression unreadable. Good. They'll be filed this afternoon. David will be served by tomorrow morning. And then? And then he'll retaliate, probably immediately. Marco stood, walking around his desk. Are you prepared for that? I don't know, but I'm done waiting to feel ready. Elena stepped into the study. I need to ask you something. Ask. When I face him, and I will face him, I need to do it alone. Marco's eyes narrowed. Absolutely not. Marco, no, Elena. You don't understand what you're asking. David isn't going to play fair. He'll bring lawyers, security, witnesses. He'll create a situation designed to break you. Then I'll break him first. Her voice was steel. You've spent 6 weeks teaching me to be strong, to fight back, to stop being a victim. But if you're standing next to me when I face him, I'm still being protected. I'm still someone who needs saving. I need to prove, to myself more than anyone, that I can do this. Marco was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. This isn't about proving anything. Yes, it is. It's about proving to myself that I'm not the woman he married, that I'm not the woman who let him control every aspect of my life. I need to look him in the eye and show him that he has no power over me anymore. And I can't do that if you're there. You could get hurt. I've been hurt before. The difference is now I know how to hurt back. Marco stared at her, and she could see the war happening behind his eyes. The instinct to protect versus the understanding that she was right. Finally, he exhaled slowly. You're not going in completely alone, he said. Compromise. You face him yourself, but I have people positioned nearby, close enough to intervene if things go wrong, far enough back that you handle it yourself. Elena considered this. Deal. But they don't step in unless I'm in actual danger. Define actual danger. Unless he puts his hands on me, words I can handle. Marco's expression was grim. You're sure about this? More sure than I've ever been about anything. He nodded slowly. Then we'll set it up. But on your terms, in a controlled environment. Not his office, not your old house. Neutral ground. Where? A dark smile crossed Marco's face. I know a place. 3 days later, Elena stood in an empty warehouse in the industrial district, waiting. The space was vast and echoing, with high windows that let in cold afternoon light. Marco's people had set it up exactly as she'd requested. A single table with 2 chairs in the center of the space, cameras positioned to record everything, and absolutely nothing else. No audience, no distractions. Just her and David, and the truth. Marco had wanted to stay, had argued for it until Elena had physically pushed him toward the door. Now he was somewhere outside with his security team, watching on monitors, ready to intervene but respecting her wishes. Elena wore simple clothes, jeans and a black sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing that David had chosen for her. She wanted him to see her exactly as she was now. She heard the door open, and her heart rate spiked. 6 weeks of training kicked in. She controlled her breathing, centered her weight, and turned to face him. David Cross looked exactly as she remembered. Expensive suit, perfect hair, that smile that had once made her feel safe and now made her feel nothing at all. But there was something different too. A tightness around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders. He was angry. Good. Elena? His voice was smooth, but she could hear the edge beneath it. You look different. I am different. He walked closer, his movements calculated. This is quite the production. Secret location, all these cameras, very dramatic. I wanted to talk somewhere you couldn't control the environment. Control? He laughed, but it sounded hollow. Is that what you think this is about? Elena, I've been worried sick about you. You disappeared in the middle of dinner, bleeding and hysterical. I thought something terrible had happened. Something terrible did happen. I left you. His smile faltered. You're not well. You need help. Come home, and we'll get you the treatment you need. Elena felt the familiar pull of his words, the way he twisted reality to suit his narrative. But this time, instead of doubt, she felt clarity. No, she said simply. No? His eyebrows rose. Elena, you're not thinking clearly. Look at yourself. You're living in some warehouse, playing dress-up in cheap clothes, pretending to be someone you're not. This isn't you. You're right. The woman you married isn't me. She was someone I pretended to be because I was too afraid to be anything else. David's expression darkened. You're being manipulated. Whoever's been hiding you, they're using you. Can't you see that? They're probably after money or leverage or... The only person who ever manipulated me was you. The words hung in the air between them. David's mask slipped. For just a second, she saw the rage beneath the charm. Watch your tone. Or what? Elena stepped closer, and she saw his surprise. The old Elena would never have challenged him. You'll raise your voice? Grab my arm? Tell me I'm being dramatic? Go ahead, David. Show me who you really are. The cameras are already recording. His jaw clenched. You think you're clever, don't you? Setting all this up, getting it on video. But you forget, I have lawyers, real ones. They'll tear apart whatever narrative you're trying to build. I'm not building a narrative, I'm telling the truth. And the truth is that you spent 3 years breaking me down piece by piece until I forgot what it felt like to be whole. You isolated me from my friends, controlled my money, decided what I wore and where I went and who I talked to. And when I didn't comply perfectly, you punished me. I never hit you. You did, multiple times. But even if you hadn't, abuse isn't just physical. You know that. You're smart enough to know exactly what you were doing. David's hands curled into fists at his sides. You're making a mistake. If you go through with this divorce, I will destroy you. I will make sure everyone knows how unstable you are, how you abandoned your marriage, your responsibilities. No one will believe you. I don't need everyone to believe me. I just need to believe myself. He moved toward her then, fast and angry, exactly like he used to. And 6 weeks ago, she would have flinched, would have stepped back, would have apologized. Instead, Elena stood her ground. David stopped inches from her face. You think you're strong now? You think whatever you've been doing these past weeks has changed anything? You're still mine, Elena. You'll always be mine. And when this little rebellion is over, you'll come crawling back. No, David. Her voice was steady, calm. I won't. Because you don't own me. You never did. You just convinced me that you did. But I'm awake now, and I see you for exactly what you are. A sad, insecure man who only feels powerful when he's making someone else feel small. His hand came up, fast and instinctive. Elena was faster. She caught his wrist mid-air, her grip iron tight, every hour of training compressed into that single moment. David's eyes went wide with shock. Don't, Elena said quietly. You don't get to touch me ever again. She released his wrist and stepped back, her heart pounding, but her hands steady. David stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. What did they do to you? They didn't do anything. They just gave me space to remember who I was before you tried to erase me. This isn't over. Yes, it is. You're going to be served with divorce papers tomorrow. You're not going to contest them. You're going to give me everything I'm asking for, which isn't much, just my freedom and enough money to start over. And in exchange, I won't go public with 3 years' worth of documented abuse. You're bluffing. Elena walked to the table and picked up a folder she'd placed there earlier. She opened it, showing him photographs of her bruises, medical reports, timestamps, witness statements from staff at their house who'd seen more than David realized. This is what your lawyers will be fighting against, she said, along with security footage from the restaurant where you lost control in front of 50 witnesses. So no, David, I'm not bluffing. I'm giving you an out. Take it. His face had gone pale. You manipulative little... Choose your next words carefully, Elena said, because everything you say is being recorded. So either continue proving exactly what kind of man you are, or accept that this is over and walk away with some dignity and tact. David looked at the cameras, at the folder of evidence, at Elena standing before him transformed into someone he didn't recognize. She could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the weighing of options, the realization that he'd lost. Finally, he straightened his tie, his mask sliding back into place. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret is not leaving sooner. He stared at her for one long moment, and she stared back, unflinching. Then he turned and walked toward the door. David, she called after him. He stopped, looking back. If you ever come near me again, if you ever try to contact me, if you even think about me, I will release everything, every photo, every recording, every piece of evidence, and I will make sure everyone knows who you really are. Do we understand each other? His jaw was so tight she thought it might crack, but he nodded once, sharp and angry, and left. The door slammed behind him, and the sound echoed through the empty warehouse. Elena stood alone in the center of the space, her whole body trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. She'd done it. She'd faced him. She'd stood her ground. And she'd won. The side door opened and Marco entered, his expression carefully controlled. He walked over to her slowly, giving her space to process. You okay? He asked quietly. Elena looked down at her hands. They were shaking, but when she looked back up at Marco, she was smiling. I'm better than okay, she said. I'm free. Something shifted in Marco's expression, something warm breaking through his usual control. Yes, you are. Elena's legs suddenly felt weak. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She sat down hard in one of the chairs. Marco pulled the other chair around and sat across from her, the same position they'd been in that first night in the restaurant's private dining room. That took guts, he said. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. Eventually. I just helped you get there faster. Elena shook her head. It was more than that. You didn't just train me to fight. You taught me to believe I was worth fighting for. Marco looked at her for a long moment. You always were. You just couldn't see it. They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of what had just happened settling around them. Finally, Elena spoke. What happens now? Now his lawyers call my lawyers, they negotiate, and in a few weeks you'll be officially divorced with enough money to start whatever life you want. And us? The question came out before she could stop it. Marco's expression shifted into something unreadable. What about us? This arrangement, me staying at your house, the protection, does it end now? Do you want it to? Elena thought about the estate, the safety she'd found there, the routine she'd built. But more than that, she thought about the man sitting across from her, the one who'd seen her at her lowest and somehow believed she could be more. No, she said honestly, but I don't want to overstay my welcome either. You're not. Marco leaned back in his chair. Stay as long as you need to figure out what comes next. There's no rush. Why are you so good to me? He smiled slightly. Because you're not afraid of me. Most people are, even when they try to hide it. But you never have been. Not even that first night. I was terrified that first night. Of your husband. Not of me. He stood, offering his hand. Come on, let's get out of this warehouse. Lucia's making dinner, and she gets offended when people are late. Elena took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. As they walked toward the door, she realized something had shifted between them. The dynamic that had started as protector and protected had evolved into something else, something more equal. Outside, the evening air was cool and crisp. Marco's car waited in the lot, sleek and black and completely impractical for anyone who wasn't trying to make a statement. As they drove back to the estate, Elena watched the city lights blur past her window and thought about the future for the first time in years. Not with fear, but with possibility. She'd walked into David's life as a girl, looking for safety, and walked out as a woman who'd learned to create her own. She'd hidden under a table from one dangerous man and learned to stand tall beside another. She'd been broken and rebuilt herself stronger. And for the first time in her life, she understood that strength wasn't about never falling down. It was about getting back up, again and again, until the people who'd knocked you down realized you were never staying down again. When they pulled into the estate's long driveway, Elena felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace, but close. The kind of calm that comes after a storm, when you're still catching your breath but you know the worst is over. Marco parked and turned off the engine but didn't immediately get out. He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "What you did today," he said, "was extraordinary. I want you to know that. I was terrified the entire time. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. You did that. Own it." Elena nodded, the words settling into her bones like truth. "Thank you, Marco, for everything." "You're welcome." He opened his door. "Well, now come on. Lucia really does get offended when people are late, and I'd rather not deal with angry Italian guilt tonight." As they walked into the house together, Elena felt the last piece of David's control fall away. She was no longer his wife, no longer his victim, no longer the woman who'd fled through a restaurant in terror. She was just Elena. And that was enough. Dinner that night was different. Elena sat across from Marco at the dining table, the same table where they'd shared dozens of meals, but the air between them had changed. She was no longer the broken woman seeking shelter. She was no longer the student learning to fight. She was simply herself, whole and present, and the shift in dynamic was palpable. Lucia served pasta with a knowing smile, her eyes lingering on Elena with something that looked like pride. The older woman had watched Elena's transformation from the shadows, had seen her evolve from a trembling ghost into someone solid and real. "You look different," Lucia said as she poured wine. "Lighter." Elena touched her face reflexively, as if the change might be visible there. "I feel different." "It shows." Lucia squeezed her shoulder gently before disappearing back into the kitchen. Marco raised his glass. "To freedom." Elena clinked hers against his. "To choosing it." They drank, and for a while they ate in comfortable silence, but Elena's mind was racing ahead, planning, calculating. The confrontation with David had been necessary, but it was only the beginning. The divorce would take weeks to finalize. His lawyers would posture and negotiate even though they knew they had no leverage, and during that time she needed to build something new. "I've been thinking," she said, setting down her fork, "about what comes next." Marco looked up, his expression interested. "And?" "I want to help other women. Women like I was. The ones who are trapped and can't see a way out." "That's ambitious." "Maybe, but I have resources now. Your lawyers made sure David's settlement includes enough money to start fresh. And I have experience. I know what it feels like to be controlled, to lose yourself piece by piece. I know what it takes to get out." She leaned forward. "I want to create something. A foundation, maybe. Or a shelter. Somewhere safe where women can go when they're ready to leave but don't have anywhere to turn." Marco studied her with those penetrating gray eyes. "You've thought this through." "I've had a lot of time to think. Every hour I spent training, every moment I spent rebuilding myself, I kept thinking about all the women who don't get this chance, who don't have someone willing to help them fight back. I got lucky, Marco. I found you, but most women don't find someone like you. So you want to be that person for them?" "Yes." Her voice was firm, certain. "I can't undo what happened to me, but I can make sure it means something. I can use it to help others." Marco was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. When he spoke, his voice was serious. "It won't be easy. You'll be putting yourself out there, making yourself visible. David and men like him won't appreciate what you're trying to do. You'll make enemies." "I'm not afraid of enemies anymore." "You should be. Fear keeps you sharp." "Then I'll be appropriately cautious." Elena met his gaze steadily. "But I won't let fear stop me from doing this." "I can't." Marco's lips curved into something almost like a smile. "Then I'll help you." Elena blinked. "What?" "You'll need seed money, connections, legal protection. I can provide all of that. Consider it an investment. Marco, I can't ask you to, You're not asking. I'm offering. He leaned back in his chair. You think you're the first person I've seen trapped in a bad situation? You think your story is unique? It's not. And maybe it's time someone with resources actually did something about it instead of just watching it happen over and over. Elena felt something warm unfold in her chest. Why would you do this? Because you're right. You got lucky. Most don't. And because, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, because I've spent my entire life building an empire on fear and control. Maybe it's time I built something on hope instead. The honesty in his words took her breath away. This man, who ruled his world with iron control, who made hardened criminals nervous with a glance, was offering to help her build something good, something that mattered. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. We have a lot of work to do. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena threw herself into planning. She met with Marco's lawyers to discuss the legal framework for a nonprofit organization. She researched existing shelters and support systems, identifying gaps and opportunities. She drafted mission statements and program outlines, refining her vision into something concrete and actionable. Marco provided resources without hovering, giving her space to build while remaining available when she needed guidance. He introduced her to people who could help: real estate developers who could identify properties, security experts who could make shelters safe, therapists who specialized in trauma recovery. But even as Elena built toward the future, the present refused to stay quiet. David's lawyers were stalling the divorce proceedings, filing motions and requesting extensions despite knowing they had no legitimate grounds for delay. It was a power play, a last attempt to maintain control by dragging out the process. Elena had expected it, but that didn't make it less frustrating. He's trying to wear you down, Marco said one afternoon as they reviewed the latest legal documents in his study. Make you so exhausted by the process that you'll settle for less than you deserve. Elena's jaw tightened. He's going to be disappointed. Good. Marco's phone buzzed and he glanced at it, his expression darkening. We have a problem. What kind of problem? He turned his phone toward her. On the screen was a news article from a local gossip site. The headline read, Cross Capital CEO's wife missing for 2 months. Friends express concern. Elena felt her stomach drop. He's going public. He's trying to control the narrative, make himself look like the worried husband. You look like the unstable wife. Marco scrolled through the article. He's got quotes from people claiming you were erratic, depressed, possibly suicidal. Those are lies. I know, but lies wrapped in concern are hard to fight. He set down his phone. He's escalating. Elena stood, pacing to the window. Outside, the gardens were bathed in afternoon sunlight, peaceful and serene, but inside her mind was racing. What do I do? You fight back, on your terms. Marco joined her at the window. You've been building something real these past 2 weeks, a foundation that will help people. What if you go public with that instead of just reacting to his narrative? Go public how? A press conference. Announce your foundation, explain why you're starting it, and in the process tell your truth. Not defensively, not as a response to him, but as a declaration of who you are now and what you're building. Elena turned to face him. That would expose me completely. No more hiding. Yes, but hiding was never going to work long-term anyway. David's made sure of that. So instead of letting him expose you on his terms, you expose yourself on yours. Take away his power by refusing to be ashamed. The idea terrified her. Standing in front of cameras, reporters, the public, and admitting that she'd been abused, that she'd run, that she'd had to rebuild herself from nothing. But as the fear surged, she felt something else underneath it. The same determination that had carried her through the confrontation with David. The same strength that Marco had helped her build. When? She asked. Marco smiled, fierce and proud. Whenever you're ready. 3 days later, Elena stood in a hotel conference room facing a sea of reporters and cameras. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back, her face free of the heavy makeup David had always insisted on. She looked exactly like herself, and that felt like armor. Marco stood at the back of the room with his security team, far enough away to give her space, but close enough to intervene if needed. His presence steadied her, reminded her that she wasn't alone, even as she stood at the podium by herself. She took a breath and began. My name is Elena Cross, and 2 months ago I left my husband after 3 years of abuse. Her voice was clear, steady, carrying across the room. I'm not here today to ask for sympathy or to engage in a public divorce battle. I'm here to announce the launch of the Elena Cross Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women escape abusive relationships and rebuild their lives. The room erupted with questions, hands shooting up, voices overlapping. Elena raised a hand and the noise subsided. I'll take questions in a moment, but first, let me explain why this matters. When I finally found the courage to leave my husband, I had nowhere to go. No support system, no resources, no plan. I was lucky. I found help when I needed it most. But most women in my situation aren't lucky. They stay because they don't see another option. They stay because they've been convinced they're worthless without their abuser. They stay because leaving feels more dangerous than staying. She paused, letting the words sink in. The Elena Cross Foundation will provide safe housing, legal support, job training, and counseling for women ready to leave abusive relationships. We'll offer them what I was offered, a chance to rebuild, a chance to remember who they are beneath the trauma, a chance to become whole again. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. Mrs. Cross, your husband has suggested you're mentally unstable. How do you respond to those allegations? Elena met her gaze without flinching. My husband spent 3 years systematically undermining my confidence, controlling every aspect of my life, and isolating me from anyone who might help me. When I finally escaped, he lost that control. Calling me unstable is his attempt to get it back. I'm not going to engage with that narrative. My mental health is strong, supervised by qualified professionals, and frankly, it's none of his business anymore. Another reporter. Do you have proof of the abuse you're alleging? Yes. Extensive documentation, including medical records, photographs, and witness statements. My lawyers have compiled everything, and it will be submitted as evidence in our divorce proceedings. I'm not going to litigate my marriage in the press, but I'm also not going to pretend it didn't happen. What would you say to other women in similar situations? Elena's expression softened. I'd say that leaving is terrifying, but staying is worse. I'd say that you are not crazy, you are not overreacting, and you are not alone. I'd say that the voice in your head telling you you're worthless is his voice, not yours. And I'd say that there is life on the other side of this. A good life. A life where you get to choose who you are and what you want. You just have to be brave enough to take the first step. The questions continued for another 20 minutes. Elena answered each one with calm precision, never defensive, never apologetic. She told her truth without shame, and with each answer she felt the last remnants of David's control fall away. When the press conference ended, Elena stepped away from the podium to scattered applause. Marco was waiting for her at the back of the room, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes bright with something that looked like respect. Well done, he said quietly as they walked out together. I feel like I'm going to throw up. That's normal. You just exposed yourself to the world, but you did it with dignity. They made their way to the car, Marco's security creating a protective barrier as reporters shouted final questions. Once inside the vehicle, Elena let out a long breath, her hands shaking slightly. What happens now? She asked. Now we wait and see how David responds, and we keep building your foundation. What happened was worse than either of them anticipated. David didn't respond publicly. Instead, he escalated privately. Within 48 hours of the press conference, Elena's lawyers informed her that David was fighting the divorce with everything he had. He'd hired a team of aggressive attorneys who were filing motions to freeze her assets, claiming she'd stolen from him. They were demanding psychological evaluations. They were subpoenaing everyone she'd been in contact with over the past 2 months, including Marco. He's trying to prove you're having an affair, Marco said, showing her the subpoena. He'll use our connection to undermine your credibility, paint you as someone who left him for another man, not because of abuse. Elena felt rage flare hot in her chest. That's absurd. We've never... I know, but the optics are complicated. You've been living in my house for 2 months. I funded your press conference. I'm helping you start your foundation. On paper, it looks suspicious. So what do we do? Marco was quiet for a moment, thinking. We give them exactly what they're asking for. I'll testify. I'll explain the circumstances of how we met, why I offered you protection, what our relationship has been. The truth is on our side, Elena. We just have to make sure it's heard. They'll try to destroy you too. They'll dig into your business, your past. Let them. I have nothing to hide that they don't already know. His expression hardened. But David does. And if he wants to make this ugly, we can make it uglier. The deposition was scheduled for the following week. Elena spent the intervening days preparing with her lawyers, rehearsing answers, steeling herself for the confrontation. Marco did the same, though he seemed less concerned about it than she was. "I've faced scarier things than lawyers," he said when she expressed worry. "David's attorneys are good, but they're not miracle workers. The facts are the facts." The morning of the deposition, Elena dressed in a charcoal suit that made her look professional and unshakable. She arrived at the lawyer's office with Marco, both of them projecting calm confidence even as the tension thrummed beneath the surface. David was already there, sitting with his legal team in a conference room that smelled of expensive cologne and desperation. When Elena walked in, his eyes tracked her movements with barely concealed rage. She sat across from him, her lawyer beside her, and met his gaze without fear. The opposing counsel began with standard questions. Timeline of the marriage. Reasons for leaving. Documentation of abuse. Elena answered each question clearly, factually, refusing to be baited into emotional responses. Then they shifted to Marco. "Mrs. Cross, how did you meet Marco Valenti?" "I was fleeing my husband during a violent altercation at a restaurant. I hid in a private dining room where Mr. Valenti was conducting business. He offered me protection." "And you accepted this protection from a complete stranger?" "I accepted protection from someone who wasn't trying to hurt me." "Yes." "Isn't it true that Mr. Valenti is involved in organized crime?" Elena's lawyer objected immediately. "Relevance?" David's attorney smiled thinly. "I'm establishing the character of the man Mrs. Cross chose to run to instead of returning to her husband." Elena leaned forward. "I ran from abuse. Where I ran to is irrelevant. What matters is that I had to run at all." The deposition continued for 3 grueling hours. They questioned every aspect of her relationship with Marco, trying to twist innocent gestures into something sordid. They showed photographs of her entering and leaving Marco's estate. They implied impropriety based on nothing but proximity. Elena refused to break. She answered every question with icy calm, her voice never wavering, her story never changing. And when they finally dismissed her, she stood with her head high and walked out without looking back at David. Marco's deposition was scheduled for immediately after hers. Elena waited outside the conference room, pacing, while her lawyer took notes. An hour later, Marco emerged. His expression was unreadable, but there was a glint in his eye that suggested the opposing counsel hadn't enjoyed the experience. "How did it go?" Elena asked. "They tried to imply I was running some kind of manipulation scheme. I explained in detail exactly what your husband had done to you and exactly why I chose to help. I also made it very clear that if they continue to waste the court's time with unfounded allegations, I'll be happy to discuss my various business holdings and how easily I could make David's professional life very uncomfortable." Elena's lawyer looked alarmed. "Mr. Valenti, I need to advise you. You need to advise me of nothing. I didn't threaten anyone. I simply stated facts." Marco's smile was sharp. Facts that David's lawyers understood perfectly. As they left the building, Elena felt something shift. The deposition had been designed to intimidate her, to make her doubt herself, to force her back into the role of victim. Instead, it had crystallized her resolve. "He's not going to stop," she said as they walked to the car. "Not until I make him." Marco opened the car door for her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time I visited him, one more time, on my terms, to end this once and for all." Marco's expression darkened. "Elena, I know what you're going to say, that it's dangerous, that he'll try to manipulate me, that I should let the lawyers handle it." She turned to face him. "But this isn't about lawyers anymore. It's about making him understand that I'm done, completely. And the only way he'll understand that is if I tell him myself." "Then I'm coming with you." "No. This is something I need to do alone. Absolutely not. Elena put her hand on his arm. Marco, you've given me everything I needed to become strong enough for this. But if you're standing next to me when I face him one last time, it undermines everything I've built. I need to prove to him and to myself that I don't need protection anymore, that I am the protection. Marco stared at her for a long moment, conflict clear in his eyes. Finally, he nodded slowly. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. 2 days later, Elena stood outside the home she'd once shared with David. The house loomed before her, all modern architecture and cold perfection, a monument to David's success and her imprisonment. She hadn't been back since the night she'd fled, and seeing it now felt surreal. She walked up to the front door and rang the bell. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. She'd trained for this, prepared for this. She was ready. David opened the door himself, surprise flickering across his face before he masked it. Elena, this is unexpected. We need to talk. He stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. She walked into the foyer, and the familiar smell of the place, his cologne, the cleaning products the housekeepers used, the scent of money and control, made her stomach turn. But she didn't run. She stood tall. David closed the door and turned to face her. I'm surprised you came here, after all your theatrics about how unsafe I made you feel. I came to end this. The divorce, the legal battles, all of it. I'm listening. Elena pulled an envelope from her bag and handed it to him. This is a settlement offer. You agree to everything I'm asking for, the divorce, the financial settlement, no further legal action, and in exchange, I don't release the full documentation of your abuse to the media. David opened the envelope, scanned the papers inside, and laughed. You think you can blackmail me? I think I can give you a choice. Sign the papers and move on with your life, or refuse and watch your reputation destroyed. Those are your options. His expression hardened. You've gotten bold. I've gotten free. There's a difference. He stepped closer, and she saw the old familiar pattern. The way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw clenched, the way his hands curled slightly. The precursors to violence she knew so well. You think you're different now, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You think whatever you've been doing these past months has changed who you are. But you're still the same weak, pathetic woman I married. And when all this is over, you'll realize you need me. Elena met his gaze without flinching. I don't need you, David. I never did. I just thought I did because you spent 3 years convincing me I was worthless alone. But I'm not alone anymore. And I'm not worthless. I'm exactly who I was always meant to be, someone you couldn't control. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. You don't talk to me like that. Elena moved without thinking, pure muscle memory from months of training. She twisted her wrist free, stepped inside his reach, and struck. Not hard enough to seriously injure, but hard enough to make her point. Her palm connected with his solar plexus, and David stumbled back, gasping. I told you, Elena said calmly, you don't get to touch me anymore. David stared at her, shock and rage warring on his face. You hit me! I defended myself. There's a difference. She picked up the envelope he'd dropped. You have 48 hours to sign these papers. If you don't, everything goes public. And trust me, David, I have nothing left to lose. But you? You have everything. Your reputation, your business, your standing in the community, all of it will burn. She turned and walked toward the door. Elena. His voice stopped her. When she looked back, he was still catching his breath, but his expression had shifted. The rage was still there, but underneath it was something else. Fear. He was afraid of her. The realization sent a surge of power through her veins. 48 hours, she repeated, and walked out. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and warm. Elena walked to her car, not the one Marco had provided, but one she'd bought herself with her own money, and got in. Her hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding her system, but beneath it was something else. Pride. She'd gone into that house, the place where she'd been broken and controlled, and she'd walked out stronger. She'd faced David not as a victim, but as an equal, and she'd won. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marco. You alive? She smiled and typed back, "More than alive. I'm invincible." His response came immediately. "Don't get cocky, but well done." Elena started the car and drove away from the house, away from the life she'd left behind, toward the future she was building. She didn't look back. There was nothing behind her worth seeing anymore. 36 hours later, her lawyer called. David had signed the papers. The divorce would be finalized within the week. He'd agreed to everything, the settlement, the terms, the non-disclosure agreement that would keep him from ever publicly discussing their marriage. It was over. Elena stood in Marco's study when she got the news, the phone still in her hand, the reality of it settling over her like snow. Marco looked up from his desk. "Well?" "He signed. It's done." Marco stood and walked around the desk. For a moment, he just looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not just respect, but recognition. Like he was seeing her clearly for the first time as someone fully formed, someone complete. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have. I just helped you do it faster." He paused. "What happens now?" Elena thought about the foundation she was building, about the women she would help, about the life stretching out before her full of possibility. "Now," she said, "I become who I was always meant to be." The foundation became real faster than Elena had imagined possible. Within 3 months of her divorce being finalized, she'd secured a building in a quiet neighborhood, large enough to house 20 women and their children, with office space for counselors and legal advisors. Marco's connections had smoothed the way through permit processes and zoning regulations that would have taken others years to navigate. His financial backing had made the renovation swift and thorough. But it was Elena's vision that shaped every detail. She insisted on warm colors instead of institutional white. She wanted the bedrooms to feel like sanctuaries, not cells. She hired staff who understood trauma because they'd survived it themselves. She created programs that didn't just offer escape, but genuine transformation, job training, education assistance, legal support, therapy that addressed the deep wounds abuse left behind. She named it Second Sunrise House, because everyone deserved a chance to see morning again after the longest night of their lives. The day they opened their doors, Elena stood in the main common area and watched as the first residents arrived. A woman with 2 small children, her face tight with fear and hope. Another woman alone, carrying everything she owned in a single duffel bag. A third with her teenage daughter, both of them looking around with the same cautious wonder Elena remembered from her first night at Marco's estate. "Welcome, Mom," Elena said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "You're safe here." She saw herself in each of them, the way they flinched at sudden movements, the way they apologized for existing, the way they seemed surprised when kindness wasn't followed by a price tag. Over the following weeks, Elena threw herself into the work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She was there every day, meeting with residents, coordinating with staff, solving problems as they arose. She taught self-defense classes in the basement gym, passing on everything Marco had taught her. She sat with women in the quiet hours after midnight when the fear was loudest, and she told them what she'd learned, that strength wasn't something you were born with. It was something you built, brick by painful brick. Marco watched from a distance, providing support when asked, but never interfering. He'd kept his promise. He'd helped her build this, then stepped back to let her run it. But Elena noticed he found excuses to stop by. A question about the building's security system. A donation check that could have been mailed. Coffee he happened to be carrying when she was working late. She didn't comment on it, didn't analyze it, just accepted his presence the way she'd learned to accept her own strength, as something that was simply there, solid and real. 6 months after Second Sunrise opened, Elena received an unexpected visitor. She was in her office reviewing applications from women seeking shelter when her assistant knocked. "There's someone here to see you. She says it's personal." Elena looked up, curious. "Send her in." The woman who entered was in her early 40s, impeccably dressed, with dark hair pulled into a severe bun. But it was her eyes that caught Elena's attention. Gray, sharp, assessing. Familiar. "Ms. Cross," the woman said, extending her hand. "My name is Sofia Valenti, Marco's sister." Elena stood, shaking her hand. I didn't know he had a sister. He doesn't advertise it. May I sit? Of course. Sophia sat with the kind of grace that suggested years of training in posture and presentation. She studied Elena with an intensity that reminded her forcefully of Marco. I wanted to meet the woman who's occupied so much of my brother's attention these past months, Sophia said. Elena kept her expression neutral. I'm grateful for his help with the foundation. The foundation? Sophia's lips curved slightly. Yes, that's what he calls it too. Very proper, very appropriate. She leaned forward. But we both know it's more than that. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Sophia's gaze was penetrating. My brother doesn't invest in charity, Ms. Cross. He invests in people. And he's never invested this much in anyone who wasn't family. So either you're the world's most convincing con artist or you mean something to him. Elena felt her pulse quicken. Marco and I have an arrangement. He helped me when I needed it. I'm building something worthwhile with that help, that's all. Is it? Sophia sat back, still watching her. I've known my brother my entire life. I've watched him build an empire on control and distance. He doesn't let people in, Ms. Cross. He doesn't form attachments. And yet somehow, you're here. You've been living in his house for months. He talks about your work constantly. He's changed his schedule to accommodate your needs. She paused. So forgive me if I'm skeptical that this is just charity. Elena chose her words carefully. What do you want from me, Ms. Valenti? I want to know if you're going to hurt him. The bluntness of it caught Elena off guard. Hurt him? My brother is stronger than most people, but that doesn't mean he's invulnerable. And I think you've gotten past defenses he didn't even know he had. Sophia's expression softened slightly. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to ask you to be honest with yourself about what this is. Because if it's just gratitude, if it's just professional, then fine. But if it's something more, and you're not prepared to acknowledge that, then you need to step back before someone gets damaged. Elena felt something shift in her chest, like a door she'd been keeping locked was suddenly rattling against its hinges. I haven't thought about it like that. Maybe you should. Sophia stood, smoothing her skirt. My brother gave up a lot to build the life he has. Safety, mostly. The ability to trust people. And I'd hate to see him risk that for someone who doesn't value what he's offering. She walked to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you're good for him. I haven't seen him this engaged with anything outside his work in years. Just make sure you know what you want before he offers you more than you're ready to accept. After Sophia left, Elena sat alone in her office for a long time, her mind churning. She'd been so focused on rebuilding herself, on creating the foundation, on helping other women, that she hadn't stopped to examine the space Marco occupied in her life. She'd told herself it was gratitude, professional respect, the natural bond that formed between people who'd weathered storms together. But that was a lie, and she knew it. Marco had become essential to her in ways that had nothing to do with money or protection. He was the person she wanted to share victories with, the one whose opinion mattered most, the one whose presence made her feel both challenged and safe in equal measure. The realization terrified her. She'd just escaped one relationship defined by dependence. The last thing she needed was to fall into another dynamic where she needed someone more than she needed herself. Except, it didn't feel like that. Didn't feel like the desperate clinging she'd felt with David, the fear of being alone that had kept her trapped. This felt like choice. Like two whole people who happened to fit together in unexpected ways. But did Marco feel the same? Or was Sophia wrong about his investment? Maybe he really was just helping because he could, because he'd seen something in her that reminded him of his own struggles. Elena didn't have answers, but she knew she couldn't avoid the questions anymore. That evening, she found Marco in his study, reviewing documents as usual. He looked up when she entered, and his expression shifted into something warmer. "How was your day?" he asked. "Complicated. Your sister came to see me." Marco's eyebrows rose. "Sophia, what did she want?" "To warn me not to hurt you." He set down his papers slowly. "Did she now?" "She seems to think there's more between us than professional courtesy." "And what do you think?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Elena walked further into the room, her heart hammering. I think I've been avoiding asking myself that question because I was afraid of the answer. And now? Now I'm trying to be brave enough to face it. She met his gaze. You've been more than generous, Marco. More than anyone had a right to expect. You gave me shelter, training, resources. You helped me build something meaningful, and I'm grateful for all of it. I hear a but coming. But that's not all this is. At least not for me. The words came out steadier than she felt. Somewhere along the way, you stopped being just the man who helped me. You became the person I trust most, the one I want to talk to about everything, the one whose presence makes everything feel possible. Marco stood moving around his desk with deliberate slowness. That sounds dangerous. It terrifies me, she admitted. I just got free from one relationship. The last thing I should want is another one. Then why are you telling me this? Because I'm tired of running from things that scare me, and because I think you feel it too, even if you won't say it. He stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable. You're right. I do feel it. I've been feeling it for months. But I didn't say anything because you needed space to figure out who you were without someone else defining you. And now? Now you're standing in front of me, whole and strong and entirely yourself, telling me something I've wanted to hear since the night you crawled out from under that table. He stepped closer. But I need you to be absolutely certain, Elena. Because if we do this, if we cross that line, there's no going back to professional courtesy. And I won't be someone you settle for because I'm safe or familiar or convenient. You're not safe, Elena said. You're one of the most dangerous men I've ever met. But you're also the most honest. You've never lied to me, never tried to manipulate me, never treated me like I was fragile or stupid. You've pushed me to be stronger while respecting my autonomy, and that's not convenient. It's extraordinary. Marco's control cracked just slightly, something vulnerable showing through. You're asking for something I don't know if I can give. I'm not good at relationships, Elena. I'm good at control, at distance, at keeping people at arm's length. What if I hurt you without meaning to? Then I'll tell you, and we'll figure it out. Like adults. Like equals. She closed the remaining distance between them. I'm not asking for perfect, Marco. I'm asking for real, for honest, for a partnership between two people who know exactly what they're choosing. He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see the war happening behind his eyes. The instinct to protect himself versus the desire to reach for something genuine. Finally, he raised his hand and touched her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. You're sure about this? More sure than I've been about anything in my life. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like she'd expected. Not desperate or demanding, but deliberate and deep, like he was memorizing the shape of her mouth, the taste of her breath. His hand slid into her hair, and she felt his control waver, felt the intensity he usually kept locked down bleeding through. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. We should talk about this, Marco said, his voice rougher than usual. Set boundaries, establish expectations. Later, Elena kissed him again. We'll talk about all of it later. Right now, I just want this. They spent that night talking until dawn, sitting together on the couch in his study while the city lights glittered beyond the windows. They talked about fears and failures, about the scars they carried, about what they wanted from a relationship and what terrified them about it. Marco told her about growing up in a family built on violence and loyalty, about learning early that love was often just another word for control. He told her about the women he'd dated who'd wanted his money, or his power, but never him, and how he'd eventually stopped trying. Elena told him about the girl she'd been before David, the one who'd loved art and believed in fairy tales. She told him about the slow erosion of self that abuse had caused, and about the fear that even now, free and strong, she'd somehow fall back into old patterns. You won't, Marco said with absolute certainty, because you know what they look like now. You've trained yourself to recognize them, and if you ever start to slip, I'll call you on it. Promise? Promise, but only if you do the same for me. As the sky began to lighten, Elena realized something profound. This felt nothing like her marriage had. There was no inequality, no fear, no sense that she had to diminish herself to make room for someone else. This felt like partnership, like two people who'd both survived hell choosing to build something better together. Over the following months, they navigated the relationship with the same care they'd brought to everything else. They kept it private at first, not because they were ashamed, but because they wanted to understand it themselves before dealing with outside opinions. They maintained separate spaces. Elena got her own apartment near the foundation, somewhere that was entirely hers, while still spending most nights at Marco's estate. They argued sometimes, both of them too strong-willed to avoid conflict, but they argued fairly, without cruelty or manipulation, and they always came back to each other once the heat had faded. The foundation continued to grow. Within a year, Second Sunrise House was operating at full capacity, with a waiting list of women seeking shelter. Elena hired more staff, expanded programs, and began planning a second location. She became a voice in the community for survivors of domestic violence, speaking at events and fundraisers, using her story to help others find courage. Marco continued running his empire, but he shifted some of his focus. He started vetting his business associates more carefully, cutting ties with anyone involved in human trafficking or exploitation. He funded other organizations doing similar work to Elena's. He became, quietly and without fanfare, someone who used his power to protect the vulnerable instead of just accumulating more. 2 years after Elena had crawled beneath that table, she stood on a stage at a fundraising gala for Second Sunrise House and looked out at a room full of donors and supporters. Marco sat near the front, watching her with quiet pride. Sophia was there too, along with several of Marco's colleagues who'd initially been skeptical about his involvement with the foundation. "When I started this journey," Elena said into the microphone, "I was running from something. A life that had become unbearable, a relationship that was slowly killing me. I ran because I had no other choice, but somewhere along the way running turned into walking, and walking turned into building. I stopped fleeing and started creating." She paused, letting her words settle. "Second Sunrise House exists because I was lucky enough to find help when I needed it most. But luck shouldn't be required. Safety shouldn't be a privilege. Every person trapped in an abusive relationship deserves a way out, deserves resources and support, and the chance to rebuild. That's what we're creating here. Not just shelter, but transformation. Not just escape, but reclamation of self." The room erupted in applause. Elena smiled, but her eyes found Marco's across the crowd. He nodded once, a small gesture that meant more than any grand declaration. After the gala, they drove back to the estate together. Elena kicked off her heels in the car, sighing with relief. "Another successful event," Marco said. "You're getting good at this." "I'm getting good at asking rich people for money while making them feel good about themselves. There's a difference." He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Still counts." Back at the estate, they found Lucia had left them a late dinner in the kitchen. Pasta and wine, simple and perfect. They ate together at the counter, talking about the evening, about upcoming plans for the foundation, about nothing and everything. "I've been thinking about something," Marco said as they finished eating. "Dangerous words. I'm serious." He set down his wine glass. "You've been splitting time between your apartment and here for 2 years now, moving back and forth, maintaining 2 spaces." Elena felt her pulse quicken. And I was wondering if you'd considered making this permanent, moving in here, not as someone I'm protecting or helping, but as my partner, as someone who chooses to build a life with me because she wants to, not because she has to. The proposal was so perfectly Marco, practical, honest, stripped of unnecessary romance but weighted with genuine meaning. Elena set down her own glass and looked at him. "Are you sure? I know you value your space, your privacy. I value you more." He reached across the counter and took her hand. "These past 2 years have been the most honest of my life. I want that to continue. I want you here, not visiting, but staying. Not as a guest, but as someone who belongs." She felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy ones. "Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll move in. Yes, I want to build this life with you. Yes to all of it." Marco smiled, really smiled, and pulled her around the counter and into his arms. "I was prepared for a longer negotiation. Sorry to disappoint." She kissed him. "But I learned from you that when something is right, you don't waste time second-guessing it. You just choose it. They went upstairs together, to the bedroom that had long since become theirs rather than his. Later, tangled together in the dark, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her here. The terror and the transformation, the breaking down and the building up, the moment she'd stopped running and started choosing. "Marco?" she said into the darkness. "Hmm? Thank you. For everything. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For believing I could be strong before I knew how." He was quiet for a moment, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "You did the work, Elena. I just gave you space to do it." "We both know that's not true. You pushed me when I wanted to quit. You challenged me when I wanted to hide. You loved you," he finished quietly. "I loved you long before I was ready to admit it. Maybe from the moment you crawled out from under that table and looked at me without fear." Elena's breath caught. They'd never used that word before. Both of them too cautious, too aware of how easily it could be weaponized. "I love you too," she said. "Not the way I thought I loved David, not out of dependence or fear. I love you because you're brilliant and dangerous and honest. Because you see me clearly and don't try to change what you see. Because you make me want to be better while accepting me exactly as I am." Marco pulled her closer, his embrace firm and warm. "We're doing this then. Building something real, together." "Together," she agreed. "As equals, as partners, as two people who chose each other freely." 5 years after that night in the restaurant, Elena stood in the gardens of Marco's estate, their estate now, and watched the sun set over the city. Second Sunrise House had expanded to 3 locations, serving hundreds of women and their children. She'd written a book about her experience that had become a bestseller, with all proceeds going to the foundation. She'd testified before Congress about the need for better domestic violence protections. She'd built something that mattered, something that would outlast her. But more than that, she'd built a life she loved, a partnership with someone who challenged and supported her in equal measure, a home that felt like safety instead of a cage, a future full of possibility instead of fear. Marco came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "How far I've come. How different everything is now." "Regrets?" "None. You?" "Only that I didn't meet you sooner." She turned in his arms to face him. "If you'd met me sooner, I wouldn't have been ready. I had to break before I could rebuild." "Fair point." He kissed her forehead. "Sophia called. She wants to know if we're coming to dinner next week." "Tell her yes. And tell her I said thank you." "For what?" "For caring enough about you to warn me not to hurt you. She was right. You did offer me more than I was ready to accept. But I'm ready now." Marco studied her face, his gray eyes warm in the fading light. "What are you saying?" Elena reached up and touched his cheek. "I'm saying that you asked me to move in because you wanted to build a life together. And we have. We've built something extraordinary. But I think we could build something even better." Understanding dawned in his expression. "Elena, marry me," she said. "Not because I need you, not because I'm afraid of being alone, but because I choose you. Every day, in every way that matters, I choose you. And I want to make that choice official." For the first time since she'd known him, Marco looked genuinely surprised. "You're proposing to me." "I am. Is that a problem?" "No, but I had a whole plan. Diamond ring, romantic dinner, the works." "So you were going to ask me?" "Of course I was going to ask you. I was just waiting for the right moment." Elena laughed. "This is the right moment. Right here, right now, in the place where you helped me become whole again. This is perfect." Marco cupped her face in his hands, his expression intense. "You're sure marriage is—" "I know what marriage is. I've done it before. This is nothing like that." She met his gaze steadily. "This is partnership, equality, 2 whole people choosing to build something together. I'm not afraid of that anymore." "Are you?" "Terrified," he admitted. "But I'm also sure. More sure than I've ever been about anything." He kissed her deep and thorough. "Yes, I'll marry you." She grinned against his mouth. "Good, because I wasn't taking no for an answer." They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony in the estate gardens, with only close friends and family present. Sophia stood as Elena's witness, tears streaming down her face as she watched her brother promise his life to someone worthy of it. Lucia catered, of course, creating a feast that had guests raving for weeks. But the most moving moment came when 3 women from Second Sunrise House arrived. Graduates of the program who'd rebuilt their lives and wanted to celebrate with the woman who'd helped them do it. They stood in the back, clutching tissues and smiling, living proof that escape was possible, that transformation was real, that survival could become thriving. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and music played, Elena found herself standing with Marco at the edge of the celebration, watching the people they'd brought together. "Happy?" he asked. Deliriously. "You?" "More than I knew how to be." He pulled her close. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for being worth choosing." They danced as the sun set. 2 people who'd found each other in the darkest moment and built something luminous together. 2 people who'd learned that love didn't have to mean control, that partnership didn't require sacrifice, that strength was something you could share without diminishing it. Elena rested her head on Marco's shoulder and thought about the woman she'd been, terrified and trembling under a table, convinced she had nothing left to lose. If she could go back and tell that woman what was coming, she wouldn't believe it. Wouldn't believe that the dangerous man who'd spared her that night would become her greatest ally, that the terror of leaving would transform into the power of choosing, that the end of one story would be the beginning of something extraordinary. But she didn't need to go back. She was exactly where she needed to be, in Marco's arms, surrounded by people she loved, building a future she'd designed herself. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, Elena made a silent promise to every woman still hiding, still afraid, still convinced that escape was impossible. She promised to keep building, keep fighting, keep creating spaces where transformation was possible, because she knew the truth now. The truth she'd learned in the hardest way possible and then taught to hundreds of others. You were never as powerless as they made you believe. You were never as broken as they claimed. And when you finally found the courage to run, to fight, to choose yourself, you'd discover that survival was just the beginning. The real story, the one worth living, started the moment you stopped running and started burning bright enough for the whole world to see. And Elena Cross, standing in her garden with her husband and her hard-won freedom, burned brighter than she'd ever dreamed possible.